Um, I enjoyed your book greatly, and I was left with one question at the end of it, which is, especially as a Vancouverite, and that is, so why does it matter? Who cares if the way I see it, the East has joined the West? They've really downloaded our killer apps and have joined us. And if the Koreans are building more ships than the Scottish and are working harder than the Scottish and are more Presbyterian than the Scottish, is that a bad thing or is that a good thing? And when I think of that, the vivid picture I have in my mind is of a boss I had from New York who came here to Vancouver in 1990 and quickly summed up the history of BC as well. You had the Aborigines. They lived along the First Nations lived along the shores. They had a great life. The fish came up once a year. They scooped them out of the river. There was berries, a few yards away. Deer were running around. And then all these Europeans came in and started rushing around and building things, and they're saying, what are all these people rushing around for? They're crazy. And now, and this is 20 years ago, he said, now the Europeans, they're sitting on Wreck Beach naked, smoking pot, and watching all these Asians coming in here and going, why are all these people rushing around for? Why can't they just chill out a little bit? And so my question is, isn't it just a good thing that they're kicking our butts and making us work a little harder? And isn't this just part of the competition that started in Europe and is now worldwide? So I'm trying to understand, why is it a bad thing, and is it a bad thing?
Well, I think this is a great question. Should we care? Does it matter? At some level, it's, as I said, a cause for celebration that the most populous societies in the world have abandoned non-functioning models and are embracing institutions that make for prosperity. But I was very careful to make the point that China has not downloaded all 6 of the killer apps. It remains a one-party state in which the rule of law is highly compromised by the arbitrary power of the party at the central and, above all, at the local level. And I think that if anybody thinks seriously about history, they should feel at least some disquiet at the prospect of, within 4 years, according to the IMF, an economy that is run by the Communist Party becoming the largest in the world. We should feel some disquiet at the thought that a fifth of humanity currently live in a communist-run state which retains a power over its people that we all would find intolerable were we subject to it. Simply to say, what goes around comes around, and it's probably good, is, I think, dangerously complacent. Of course, it may be that China will continue to move in the direction that I hope it will, in the direction of the rule of law, in the direction of representative government, and away from the one-party state with all the abuses that come with that. But it is far from certain. Right now, the reality is that, unlike in the Cold War, the ideological antagonist is going to win the economic race. The Soviet Union failed to do that. At no point did it come close to overtaking the United States, despite all the bluster of Khrushchev. The IMF has China overtaking the US in terms of GDP in 2016. And in some ways, that understates the scale of the Chinese challenge. The Chinese challenge in the realm of cyberspace is very real. And if your corporation hasn't experienced it, then you are either lucky or oblivious. That's a challenge, a strategic challenge in what might be called the new frontier of strategy that I take very seriously indeed. And so, by the way, do the leading military thinkers and strategists of the United States. So no, I don't think we can simply say, whatever, it's fine. It's not fine. It's not fine that leadership is passing to a society that is not based on individual freedom. That is not fine. And anybody who thinks it's all going to be okay doesn't really understand the historical process. transitions in the balance of power are seldom peaceful. And that's another important point I try to make in the book. We need to be very acutely aware of the dangers that lie ahead as this moment arrives when the US, for the first time since the 1880s, ceases to be the dominant economy in the world. I hope I've answered your question, sir.
We just have a follow-up question here, and then we'll go back to the audience. So you speak about the success of the 300 million Chinese middle class. How do you think the Chinese government will extend this opportunity to the other 1 billion of their citizens?
Well, it's not yet 300 million. I mean, it's probably not even 100 million. But by 2020, most people reckon that there'll be a middle class of some 200 million. But that will still leave an enormous number of Chinese people living in what we would consider abject poverty. As is well known, capitalism, when it's unleashed, generates inequality. You don't have to be a Marxist to believe that. China's Gini coefficient, it's, as a measure of inequality, that's quite a good one. It's probably getting close to the US now. It's not as bad as, say, Brazil, but it's certainly a much more unequal society than it was in the time of Mao. Do the Chinese have a plan for their poor? Well, they have a better plan for their poor than, say, the Indians. What's really striking if you look at China's developmental trajectory is that many, many more people are being lifted out of that super poor sub-Saharan African poverty in China than in any other comparable country. The middle class is going to be way larger than the Indian middle class. If you simply look at people with incomes above 10,000 up to 100,000, it's a much, much larger number. So I think that the Chinese could credibly claim that they are moving in the right direction. But what they have to do is to continue to take people out of basic agriculture and move them into cities. That's the plan, and that's what they're doing. And that the speed of urbanization compares with the speed of urbanization in the United States 50 to 100 years ago. So I don't think that's their problem. I mean, it's not the super poor that really the Chinese regime worries about. I recently asked a leading economist there what was his biggest worry. And I thought we would have a conversation about the real estate bubble or possibly excess investment in infrastructure. But actually, the conversation we had was entirely about politics. And he said, I worry about how we give some kind of voice to this new articulate class that microblogs about corruption every time a train crashes. And that I think, is the real challenge that they face. And it's by no means clear. There is no clear roadmap that tells you how you get from a one-party state to something that resembles representative government.